sat behind her. Edward Murray, West Dorset. Order. I invite Vera Hobhouse to move the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Weston. It's a pleasure to serve with you in the chair, and I thank the Backbench Business Committee for granting me this debate. I beg to move that this House has considered the cost of energy. The cost of energy is a problem that impacts all areas of our lives, from the homes we live in to the businesses we work for. For far too many, the reality of high energy bills is an immediate, daily concern. A recent poll published by Opinion highlighted that, on average, 88% of all adults thought it was important that the government focuses on reducing the cost of energy over the next 2 years, while 90% remained concerned about the increase in energy prices. The cost of energy has become a key strain for most households. For households in Bath and across the country, bills continue to rise at unprecedented rates. Many struggle to keep up. These rises will heap considerable pressures on millions of people who are still feeling the pressures of inflation of the past few years. It is simply unacceptable, and it is a crisis that we cannot ignore. The effects of high energy costs extend far beyond the immediate financial burden. The cost of electricity in the UK is also holding back our efforts to decarbonise the economy and to address the climate crisis. And we must not shy away from that debate. At present, UK households pay roughly the same for both their gas and electricity bills, around to £850, despite using more than 4 times more gas than electricity. It makes electricity in the UK 4 times more expensive than gas. The price imbalance is not only creating financial hardship for consumers, but is also actively deterring them from making the switch to cleaner, more efficient heating systems. The UK currently relies on 25 million fossil fuel boilers to heat its homes, accounting for 16% of the nation's entire CO2 emissions. Decarbonising our heating sector is a significant opportunity for the UK to cut down on carbon emissions. Take heat pumps, for example, one of the most advanced and environmentally friendly ways to heat our homes. Heat pumps are 4 times more energy efficient than gas boilers and could reduce CO2 emissions by 75%. Yet just 1% of UK households have a heat pump. Why? Because the UK's electricity prices consistently undermine the financial incentive to install them. Under current costs of electricity, running a heat pump can be more expensive than running a gas boiler for larger households and be the same for medium-sized homes, even though heat pumps are far more efficient. In Sweden, over 50% of single-family homes have heat pumps installed, while 95% of all new homes are heated by heat pumps now. The success of Sweden's heat pumps adaptation is hinged on the country's price ratio between gas and electricity, effectively incentivizing electric heating systems compared to fossil fuel ones. There are a range of other heating technologies which can work alongside heat pumps. Alternative technologies, such as heat batteries, are another example of why the price of electricity is significantly hindering the UK's ability to move away from gas. Heat batteries can become a proven solution in recent time for about 20% of UK homes for which heat pumps are not suitable. Modern heat batteries can operate at equivalent temperatures to fossil fuel systems and can make use of the existing pipes and radiators in the home at a similar running cost to a heat pump and embed valuable flexibility in the electricity system. However, despite such innovations, which are at our fingertips, the government continues to drive consumers into the arms of gas boiler manufacturers because more often than not it is still cheaper to buy a gas boiler. The disparity in energy prices between gas and electricity is not just a domestic issue, it is part of a broader trend in which the UK is falling behind other nations in the transition to low-carbon heating. In the first half of 2024, gas prices in the UK were 22% below, while electricity prices were 27% above the EU average. In fact, the UK had the highest ratio of electricity to gas unit prices in the entire EU at that time. The pricing imbalance places the UK at a competitive disadvantage in terms of decarbonisation. As the rest of Europe steams ahead with its effort to electrify heating, the UK is lagging behind due to our higher cost of electricity. It not only affects individual households and businesses, but also significantly undermines the UK's position as a world leader of climate action. In order to achieve our statutory net zero goals, we need to make sure that the transition to clean energy is as affordable as possible for everyone. The current energy pricing structure is holding us back. And what must change? The first and most urgent step is to reform the policy costs that are currently placed on electricity bills. A regressive and incoherent stack of levies on electricity bills has inflated the cost of electricity for consumers to the point it is incompetitive with gas. Therefore, the government's current energy policies are working against its own objectives and make clean technology more expensive than their fossil fuel counterparts. As it stands, policy costs and levies currently account for 11% of a typical household total energy bill, but they are not allocated evenly. Policy costs account for 16% of a typical electricity bill, but only 5% of a typical gas bill. There is widespread industry and political support for reforming these policies, costs and levies. However, the argument of how to do so has been going on for far too long. The simplest options for reform would be to remove all levies from electricity and into general taxation. This would, however, lower energy bills for every household in Britain, but it comes at a very high cost to the exchequer, and that is currently not realistic. Another option is to rebalance the levies by moving them from electricity to gas. While this option would be good news for the 4.5 million households that do not use gas heating, for the 22.5 million gas-using households, of which 2 to 3 million are in fuel poverty, their bills would rise between £15 and £100 per year. I'm happy to give that.
Robbie Moore.
Member for Bath for allowing an intervention. 17.6% of those who live in Keighley are indeed in fuel poverty, and we're seeing right now Labour-run Bradford Council wanting to raise council tax by 10%, and indeed with the removal of winter fuel allowance, 64,000 pensioners across the wider Bradford district are going to be impacted. So does the honourable member agree with me that there needs to be more support for those most vulnerable in our societies, not only to do with the cost of energy, but to do with the cost of making sure that they can keep warm during this winter period?
Well, the honourable member has just predicted what I'm coming to, and that is that it is important to emphasise the responsibility of the government to look after the most vulnerable in our society and protect them during any efforts to rebalance gas and electricity prices. So they need to be absolutely protected. I cannot comment on the council bill that he's referring to. That is, of course, a local matter. It is imperative that any policy changes prioritises the needs of these households, ensuring that they're not left behind as we look to electrify the UK's heating system. A more focused way to adjust policy funding could be to collect revenue from levy-funded programmes through a single levy control system. This system would have two straightforward rates, one for electricity and one for gas, set by ministers at an appropriate level. These rates would be based on the cost per kilowatt hour, so more energy-efficient technologies would have lower taxable amounts, making them more affordable in comparison. Unlike other rebalancing methods, this approach would allow the government to directly manage its impact on households. Since electricity is always more efficient than fossil fuel, its price would go down, encouraging more people to switch. Policy reform, Chair, is an essential step to addressing the unacceptable price disparity that currently exists in the UK between gas and electricity. And I hope the Minister has very carefully listened to the proposal that I have just put forward. Mr. Weston, the impact of Brexit on our energy system has been somewhat brushed under the carpet. The turbulence of COVID and the shockwaves of Russia's invasion of Ukraine have dominated the conversation. It masks the quieter but significant effects of our departure from the EU's energy framework. One of the most pressing issues is passive divergence, not following new EU regulations simply because we are no longer a part of the system. This isn't always a deliberate choice, but it is already creating challenges, particularly in electricity trading. The UK was once part of an integrated, efficient energy market with the EU, where electricity flowed freely, reducing costs and improving security. Now, without alignment, we risk inefficiencies, higher prices, and reduced energy security. We need strategic decision-making. Not all divergence is bad, but it must be a conscious, informed choice based on clear evidence, not ideology. And when it comes to energy, the benefits of cooperation with the EU are overwhelming. Shared markets bring stability, common rules ensure fair trade, and joint planning strengthens resilience against global energy shocks. The EU and the UK share the same fundamental energy challenges, securing affordable, clean and reliable power for the future. Our interests remain aligned, and so should our approach. We must ensure that divergence, where it happens, is a decision, not an accident. In addition, we need to focus on policies for community energy. We Liberal Democrats have long championed the idea for community energy. Community energy currently accounts for less than 0.5% of total UK electricity generation capacity. However, according to the Parliamentary Environmental Audit Committee, with the right government support, the sector could grow 12 to 20 times by 2030, powering 22 million homes and saving 2.5 million tonnes of CO2 emissions every year. I welcome the government's inclusion of the local power plant into the Great British Energy Bill. It marks a welcome step forward for the community energy sector. The plan intends to deliver an ambitious target of 8 gigawatts of renewable energy projects by 2030 in partnership with local authorities and communities across the country. To achieve this target, significant scale-up of local and community-owned energy will be required, and there needs to be a support programme in place for community energy organisations in England, drawing on successful models from Scotland and Wales. Bath and West Community Energy, a community benefit society, has reduced carbon emissions by an average of 3,300 tonnes per year, with about 31 renewable energy projects. Chair, let's make sure every community across the country has something like Bath and West Community Energy in their patch. I repeat, as we have done many times, community energy reduces bills, creates local jobs, and accelerates the transition to a low-carbon future. Home insulation is another key area to reduce energy costs, particularly in my constituency of Bath, where much of the housing stock is old and in dire need of insulation. Insulation remains one of the most effective ways to reduce energy demand and lower bills and cut emissions. But the government have delayed the implementation of their warm homes grants significantly. This scheme was not implemented this winter and will only operate from next winter again. The government must tackle the efficiencies of these schemes head-on, ensuring that residents receive retrofit measures which provide value for money and stand the test of time. And the Energy Security Select Committee will actually look into these issues tomorrow, and I hope people will listen very carefully. To accelerate and de-risk delivery of the Warm Homes Plan, the UK government should create a national expert advice service for England, so households have the confidence to receive tailored advice to upgrade their homes. It would deliver consistent outcomes across the country and end the postcode lottery in advice services. Mr. Weston, I hope the government considers the points outlined today. We need long-term solutions that will make clean energy affordable for all, meet our net zero targets, and lift the pressures on families on rising energy costs.
May I remind members that they should bob if they wish to be called in the debate. The question is that this House has considered the cost of energy. Mike Reeder.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's very pleasure to serve under you. Thank you, honourable member and my fellow ESNES Select Committee member for bringing this really important debate. And we've been doing a lot of work in the committee on energy pricing and the cost to consumers over recent weeks. So very, very timely. Chair, it's clear this government has got a really ambitious plan to achieve clean power by 2030. And in reality, for people in my constituency and across the country, that mission is really about lowering energy bills for families, quadrupling offshore wind, tripling solar, doubling onshore wind, getting projects like Hinkley over the line and operational. These are all critical things that are going to make sure that we bring resilience into our energy markets, but importantly also that we protect UK consumers from volatile foreign markets, taking control back from Putin and petrostates and placing the power of energy in the hands of British people. These targets represent the biggest expansion of renewable energy in our history, and the changes could save hundreds, if not thousands of pounds a year for families on their energy bills. I'd like to recognise the great points made in the opening speech, particularly around innovation in the sector, and I welcome her thoughts on heat pumps. I too believe there is more than just heat pumps that will solve this crisis, and I think it's really positive to hear you talk about heat factories especially. But I'd like to add to this debate and speak more about the crisis energy costs that this government is tackling, how it started, and what we need to do to solve it. So we heard in the Select Committee evidence that paints a stark picture. Average energy bills are now 43% higher than they were in 2019, with over 6.1 million people living in fuel poverty. And this situation in my constituency reflects the national crisis, with families and businesses struggling under the astronomical weight of energy costs. But this crisis didn't happen overnight. It is the direct result of years of Conservative failure to properly insulate our homes, to diversify our energy sources, to reform the energy market, and ultimately to protect consumers. The previous government's resistance to onshore wind, their devastating cuts to energy efficiency programmes, and their reckless over-reliance on volatile international gas markets has left British taxpayers paying the price. And when the last Labour government left power, energy efficiency installations were at their peak, with 2.3 million homes upgraded. But the next government dropped support, those numbers plummeted, and as was mentioned, we now have some of the least efficient housing in the whole of Europe. The consequences of these decisions are felt every day from my constituents who find themselves living in poorly insulated homes. There's 17,000 homes in Northampton Southwich, EPCC and below, and those homes waste energy but also waste my constituents' money. So the fundamental issue is clear that we must break our resilience on gas if we want to see energy bills come down. As Ofgem CEO told our committee a few weeks ago, unless we transform energy infrastructure, we remain at the mercy of volatile international gas markets. And the evidence shows that in a clean power system, even a major shock, as we saw in recent years, would see bills rise by an average of 9%, versus the 44% we saw following the gas crisis in 2022. And that's why this government's mission for clean power is so absolutely vital. It's not just about climate, it's about bringing bills down. And under questioning from our committee, Ofgem's representative agreed the target, whilst ambitious, is very, very achievable. But they also warned that, of course, without urgent action on planning reform, supply chain, we do risk missing this crucial deadline. But we must also acknowledge the historic failures of market regulation. Consumer debt has now reached an astronomical £3.82 billion. That's nearly double how it was 2 years ago. And when we pressed Ofgem on what would trigger the government to take serious intervention, they couldn't give a clear answer. But it's clear something more has to be done. The Chief Executive admitted that they should have developed much more detailed rules around prepayment meters and about market regulation much earlier, rather than relying on the broad principles that left vulnerable customers exposed. And even now, they acknowledge significant gaps in their powers to protect consumers, particularly around data sharing within government departments to identify vulnerable households that need support. And one particular example we dug into and I want to raise is the regulator's handling of supplier failures. It is deeply problematic. When energy companies went bust, the shareholders, we were told, were able to walk away with hundreds of millions of pounds of energy hedges, whilst taxpayers were left picking up the bill as energy companies collapsed. And Ofgem admitted to us they lack the power to recover those funds on behalf of the taxpayer, and that's hundreds of millions of pounds that are now lost to those who have gambled on our energy market. It's a striking example of how the market has been stacked against ordinary people. And the regulator's Director of Markets did acknowledge to us that some suppliers are still not compliant with new financial resilience requirements, but could not provide us with assurance of what actions they would take if they failed to meet the deadline by March. Chair, moving to clean power is essential, and we must take immediate action to protect vulnerable households. And that's why I personally support the move to a social tariff, a discounted energy scheme for low-income households that makes sure that we build a fairer, greener and more sustainable energy system for everyone. At its core, a social tariff is targeted discount for energy for people on low incomes, acting as a vital safety net to ensure that nobody has to choose between heating and eating. A social tariff could provide a guaranteed below-market rate for eligible households, automatically enrolling those who qualify. No complex switching around, no shopping around, just straightforward help for those who need it. And if we look at the evidence, 6.1 million households now living in fuel poverty. Many are paying a poverty premium. Those, particularly who are paying more for their energy because are struggling, are using prepayment meters or on standard variable tariffs, and that is simply wrong. A properly designed and implemented social tariff would be mandated across all suppliers so that no one misses out. It would automatically enrol eligible households using existing data to remove barriers to entry, and it would deliver real savings for those most at need. This is all about making sure that as one of the richest economies in the world, everyone can afford to keep their homes warm. The technology exists, the mechanisms exist, and now we need the political action to make it happen. Chair, clean power by 2030 combined with proper consumer protection and targeted support will bring bills down for good. The previous government's failures have cost families dearly, and I urge members from across the House to use their voice to call for greater protection for energy users, greater power for regulators, and to call out the profiteering of energy companies at times of crisis. Thank you.
Helen Maguire.
Thank you, Mr Weston. It's an absolute pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. So the cost of energy is a crisis hitting every household in this country, and it's not just a crisis of affordability, it's a crisis of national security, a crisis of climate and a crisis of social justice. And yet the government has failed to act with urgency. Russia's assault on Ukraine has made clear the dangers of energy dependence, and we can no longer afford to be dependent on fossil fuels. Investing in homegrown renewable energy is not just about cutting bills, it's about safeguarding our energy security, protecting ourselves from geopolitical shocks. Climate change is an existential threat, with rising global temperatures driving wildfires, floods, droughts, and with those come food and water insecurity and displacement, which in turn fuels conflict. We need a government willing to make the tough choices to invest in clean energy and to ensure the UK is not left behind in global transition. There are many areas that require urgent reform. We need to provide incentives for installing heat pumps that cover real costs, as the Honourable Member outlined. We must also create a rooftop solar revolution by expanding incentives for households to invest in solar panels, including a guaranteed fair price for electricity sold back to the grid. Tackling the twin crises of cost of living and climate change. We must get the basics right and invest in insulation. Cold, inefficient homes mean higher energy bills, fuel poverty and a staggering £1.4 billion NHS bill for treating cold-related illnesses. The UK has the oldest housing stock in Europe, with 1/5 of homes built more than a century ago. A national strategy for retrofitting pre-1920 homes is long overdue, and the Liberal Democrats would launch an energy insulation programme starting with free retrofits for low-income households. And we must also protect the vulnerable now. The government's decision to axe the winter fuel payments was the wrong choice at the wrong time, stripping support from pensioners just as another cold winter bites. Liberal Democrats would restore this help, introducing a social tariff for vulnerable households and raising the funds by imposing a proper windfall tax on oil and gas giants profiteering from this crisis. The cost of energy is pushing people into hardship today, and without action will do for years to come. Just in Epsom Newell, my constituency, 6,518 people are currently living in fuel poverty. Now, I welcome the work of so many community centres in providing the warm hubs, but quite frankly, they just simply shouldn't be needed. We must support households now by restoring winter fuel payments, introducing a social tariff and driving a rooftop solar revolution. And we must cut bills for the future by investing in clean energy, making homes more efficient and ensuring that those who have done the right thing and who've gone green are not penalised. This is about security, sustainability and fairness. The government must act. The cost of inaction is simply too high.
Yeah.
John Mill.
Thank you, Mr. Weston, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairship. This country has been in need of a coherent national energy policy for a long time. The lack of one has left us in a difficult place. UK energy prices, from figures from June last year, are 27% higher than our EU counterparts. That's made any energy-intensive industry unviable, but it's also a major problem for all of us. Many millions of households in England are living in fuel poverty. Total energy debt across the country is now estimated at 3.8 billion. Indeed, in my constituency of Horsham, is quoted as one of the biggest causes of people slipping into debt. One part of the solution, and the one I want to focus on today, is community energy. The government is getting behind renewable energy projects, which is very welcome, but they're paying little attention to gaining public consent. The great advantage of community energy is that it's generated locally, requires no unpopular transmission systems, and benefits the very people who have to put up with the local infrastructure and potential loss of green space. The best way to get local consent to a new solar or wind farm is to let the local people benefit from the energy directly. Unfortunately, neither the last government nor this one is doing enough to encourage the industry. At the moment, it remains too costly and too bureaucratic for community energy companies to become energy providers. There's no sliding scale of fees to reflect the size or capacity of an energy project, which effectively rules out smaller enterprises. Furthermore, community energy companies have to sell the energy they produce at a fraction of its genuine retail value to registered suppliers. Absurdly, local communities are frequently unable to buy the energy directly from the solar farm or windmill they can see from their own windows. Communities are obliged to sell their energy back to the grid at a low-cost price, only to buy it back at the marginal rate of gas, with all the transmission costs added in that they had no need to be included. This is despite community energy projects that in some instances are achieving a reduction of 75% in per kilowatt hour pricing. And these obstacles are part of the reason why Community Energy Horsham, in my constituency of Horsham, are currently struggling to get their solar energy project across the line. They've had council backing for a community-funded project to put solar panels on the Bridge Leisure Centre for some time. And I'm sure it will happen at some point. But it's been a few years already, and the whole process is much more difficult than it needs to be. So what do we need? We need a community electricity export guarantee to create a statutory right for sites that generate low-carbon electricity with a capacity below 5 megawatts to export their electricity to an existing electricity supplier on fair terms. And we need a community electricity supplier services scheme to create a requirement on existing larger energy suppliers to work with community schemes to sell the power they generate back to local customers. Encouraging community energy is the democratic way to determine local land use. When local communities directly reap some of the rewards from community energy projects, not only does it put power, in every sense of the word, in their community's hands, it also demonstrates the benefits of a greener energy transition, which is so important for our net zero targets and indeed the planet. I urge the government to put public consent at the heart of their energy strategy. And indeed, I could say the same about their planning strategy, but that's a whole other debate. And the best way to do that is by empowering community energy schemes. Never mind Great British Energy, I want to see Great Horsham Energy, and indeed Great Everywhere Energy. Thank you.
Jim Shannon.
Mr. Chairman, first of all, can I say it's a real pleasure to serve under your chairship. And can I thank the Honourable Lady for Bath for leading today's debate. She's been assiduous and enthusiastic and committed to this here, and I think every one of us owes a debt to the Honourable Lady for her contribution and for setting the scene so very well. A real pleasure to see the Minister in his place. I'll tell you what, as Ministers go, there's a hard-working one. UQ yesterday, statement yesterday, debate today. He's done the whole lot, all in a matter of hours. So we look forward to his contribution for today's debate, and also a pleasure to see the Honourable Lady in her place as Shadow Minister as well. We've seen in the last couple of years massive fluctuations in terms of energy prices, thousands of households carrying the burden of this for many months. Energy prices have fallen since summer 2023, but we are still in a situation where there's little prospect of cuts soon. So for that reason, it's good to be here to discuss this issue. I will, of course, Mr Chairman, give an Northern Ireland perspective of a big ask of one ask of the Minister. I suppose to be fair, he probably knows what it is before we start. But nonetheless, for the record, as I follow through my contribution, I'll be very keen to hear the Minister's discussions with his equivalent in the Northern Ireland Assembly, just to see how we can work better here together to help our constituents back home. Global prices for gas, for electricity and oil, Mr Chairman, have been on the increase from summer 2021 after the pandemic. And furthermore, we have witnessed a massive hike in prices after the Russian invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. There's things that government and the former government and this government have no control over, but there are things that we can do. For Northern Ireland customers, it's been slightly different, as we're not controlled by the energy price cap in England. However, government support was provided, but this ended in July 2023, leading to a very large hike which families are still struggling with. The Minister, in his response to my question to him in the UQ yesterday, knows the point I'm going to make about oil. 68% of houses in Northern Ireland, households in Northern Ireland, have oil as their main and primary heating source and cooking source as well. Since October 2023, the cheapest prices for Northern Ireland's largest supplier have been higher than prices under the cap in the rest of the United Kingdom, right here. The cost of energy can be monumental for local businesses, Mr Chairman, and not just for the large chain businesses. The local family-run small business is the one that will suffer probably most. And after the pandemic, I was approached by countless local businesses in my constituency that simply were unsure how they were going to survive the climax of their business after many years was facing many of them. Local coffee shop in the town where my office is, and it's one that we usually frequent, has had to close down as it was not sustainable anymore. Energy suppliers back home, such as Power NI, can provide tailored plans for businesses, but the price is no different, and businesses can often be forgotten about. Mr Chairman, we will not be able to partake in this debate without mentioning the impact, and I have to say this, by the way, it would be remiss of me not to say this, government's decision to withdraw the winter fuel payment from our pensioners. I have known of many of those in my constituency who have contacted me, who relied on this to get them through the winter. There are not only concerns that this may plunge thousands of pensioners into fuel poverty, but the potential health risks at stake are massive. And with older individuals perhaps struggling to afford adequate heating, this can increase the risk of respiratory illnesses, of strokes, of hypothermia. And it isn't exaggeration, Mr Chairman, to say that many of those elderly people that I know, they haven't and can't afford the heat, so they don't turn it on. But what they do is put extra clothes on. And I find it quite distressing, Mr Chairman, to visit elderly people who I see wrapped up like a polar bear. And I really, well, of course I will, yes.
Mr Weston, I thank the honourable member for giving away. He's making an excellent contribution. The radio signal, the radio frequency network that controls heating for many people, and the Minister will be aware of that, in remote areas, controls what they pay, is going to be switched off in June. And at present, the replacement infrastructure is not there, so many people could end up paying through the nose inadvertently. And I find this very, very worrying. So I wonder if the honourable member, and perhaps the Minister, when he concludes, agrees that the data communication company needs to speed up their rollout of cellular coverage as quickly as possible, We're only 4 months away from June, and it's a deeply, deeply worrying situation for pensioners in my constituency and many other remote areas.
Yeah. I thank the honourable member for that intervention, and the Minister's been listening, I know he does, and the honourable member has outlined a very specific issue which is incredibly worrying as June approaches. And I mean, the older you get, the faster time goes. I'm not sure if that's right, but it just seems to go faster. But the honourable member is right to say that by June will be here tomorrow, it'll be that quick, and therefore the crisis has to be addressed today. So I thank him for doing that, and I look forward to the Minister's response. I'll always ensure that the Minister's Department are aware of the impact that this could have in relation to health, and has had this winter, and look to the Minister for direction, but most importantly, reconsideration for the coming years. Mr Chairman, there were schemes available by this government under the previous government that were set up to support families and households that were struggling. These have now closed. Similarly, back home, the Assembly has previously taken steps to support people. It is no secret that people are still struggling, and on occasions where the price of energy is out of our hands, there are measures we can take to ease the burden. And despite the general fall in prices since early 2023, typical bills under the January to March 25 price cap will still be 43% higher than in winter 21-22. So the perspective of price cost today is really, really bleak. So I look to the Minister now for direction and plans for the rest of this coming year to support our constituents. To conclude, Mr Chairman, there are steps that can be taken to reduce pressure. Perhaps this is a closer look at the impact of renewable solar energy, or better dedication to financially supporting our constituents. Regardless, I look forward to hearing what the Minister has to say, and hearing of the planned integration between himself and his counterparts back home at the Northern Ireland Assembly, because we need to see the benefits of being a part of this great United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. We are very much proud to be part of that, but we also look to government here to centrally help us in Northern Ireland Assembly and help our constituents. I believe the Minister's got a heart for that. I do believe that, honestly, and I look forward very much to the Minister's response to see how he can help us. Thank you so much.
Edward Morello.
Thanks very much, Mr Weston, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairship, and I thank my honourable friend, the member for Bath, for securing this important debate. I should probably declare that prior to being elected, I spent the better part of a decade in renewable energy finance. And while I wouldn't claim to be an expert, I hope I bring some useful insights to this debate. The cost of energy remains one of the largest issues households across the country are facing, and nowhere is that more apparent than in rural communities like West Dorset. Fuel poverty is a dire issue. In 2023, 13% of households were in fuel poverty, and nearly 40% of households were spending more than 10% on their annual income on energy. The situation is even more worse for vulnerable families. Nationally, nearly 900,000 single-parent households are living in cold homes. It is a much-cited statistic that the UK has the highest energy prices in the developed world, but this is misleading, and in no small part based on an accounting issue. In the year 2000, just 3% of the UK's energy came from renewables. Today, that figure is 42%. Despite the progress, we are still paying energy bills tied to the price of fossil fuels. This is because of the marginal pricing system, which means that all electricity is charged at the rate of the most expensive source, currently gas, a commodity that, like oil, is at the whim of international events and geopolitical fluctuations. Between 2010 and 2021, the global average cost of electricity generated from a renewable energy source over its lifetime declined by 88% for solar, 68% for onshore wind, and 60% for offshore wind. Yet even as renewable energy has become drastically cheaper to generate, the wholesale cost of energy to consumers remains high. This is simply unacceptable. It is simply unacceptable that companies are making vast profits, while households, particularly in rural areas, are struggling to afford the basic necessities of heating their homes. The government could solve this problem by delinking fossil fuels and renewable energy pricing, as other countries do. Our wholesale energy price would then be the weighted average between the two and would bring us on par with the energy prices of other nations. Far more importantly, it would reduce costs to consumers. The government must take decisive action to break the link between gas prices and electricity prices. The previous government promised a review into electricity market arrangements, and this current government should do so. Creating a separate market for renewables and fossil fuels generated electricity would make energy fairer and more affordable to consumers. If I will, I'll make one other appeal for action by this government. It is a trope often repeated that we need to put more solar panels on roofs and car parks rather than farmland. I do not disagree, but it fails to recognise that doing so is commercially unviable. In the simplest terms, if utility-scale solar, and this is an oversimplification, costs 50 pence per unit to build, commercial rooftop is double that, and carports double that again. The value paid by energy companies for exported renewable energy is often as little as 5.5 pence per unit. So utility scale is the only solar that works as a pure export model. That unit of electricity is then sold under a green energy tariff to consumers at a vastly inflated price. The only person benefiting is the energy companies. Again, the government has a relatively straightforward fix for this at its disposal. Mandate a minimum export value. Yes, energy wholesalers will make less money, but frankly, I can live with that. More importantly, it would unlock investment in rooftop and carport solar, end the competition between food production and net zero, and ultimately reduce costs for consumers. These are easy wins for the government that claims to be committed to fighting climate change. Yet instead of following the advice of industry, the government has chosen to axe winter fuel payments, stripping vital support for many of the poorest pensioners at a time when energy bills remain high, a decision that should be reversed. Mr Weston, Chair, the UK must take back control of its energy future. We cannot continue with a system where consumers are at the mercy of volatile international gas prices while energy companies rake in massive profits. We must end the outdated pricing model that ties renewables to the cost of fossil fuels and unlock investment in rooftop and carport solar. We must ensure that the benefits of renewables reach the people who need them most, and we must ensure that no family, no child, no pensioner is left struggling to heat their home when we have the tools to fix this at hand. Thank you.
Mr Weston, it's a pleasure to serve on your chairship, and congratulate the honourable member for Bath for bringing forward this debate today. I'm not going to speak too long today because we've had several debates on this issue. I'm trying to focus on some of the key points that I think need hammering home. For several years, past colleagues in the Highlands and Islands, and now myself and the Honourable Member for Argyll and Bute have been campaigning on the Highland Energy Rebate campaign. And that would be a geographic rebate for people in the Highlands and Islands affected by higher fuel prices. I have to say, I'm not precious about the mechanism for that. There is a bit of kickback about a geographic mechanism. But it's a very useful debating tool because it hammers home the issue that there is a geographic discrepancy and a discrimination, bluntly, for people living in the Highlands and Islands and the north of Scotland more generally. But we need a solution proposed from the government, and we need that urgently. For decades, people in the Highlands and Islands have been paying more for their energy than almost any other part of the UK. They pay more for distribution. But no other part of the UK pays more for transmission. All people see are wires. They're wires, they're pylons, there's energy infrastructure, much of it in the Highlands and Islands, and that energy infrastructure is used to send energy literally hundreds of miles away, but that isn't distributed across bills in the same way that distribution charges are. And that means that, for example, in the flat that I live in when I'm down here in this place, I pay 40 pence roughly on standing charges, and at home I pay 60 plus pence on standing charges. That's a third extra every single day on that standing charge, and that's the same for people across the whole of the Highlands and Islands, and that maybe puts it in some kind of perspective for folk. For decades, successive governments have failed to tackle poor regulation. Ofgem has shown little interest in dealing with energy prices in the north of Scotland. I suppose maybe 20 years ago, when we were maybe less focused on the decarbonisation issues than we are now, and we were trying to get people on grid because there were so many people off grid in the Highlands and Islands. They wouldn't look at getting gas into more remote areas was very, very low on the priority list. Now, I'm not advocating that we should be doing that now. There are new technologies that have come in since then, and we need to be focused on them to decarbonise our energy systems. But it just evidences that this has been going on for a long time, and that solutions have not been found. They've always focused on the big urban areas with the big populations to the detriment of rural customers. And that's not acceptable, because the Highlands and Islands of Scotland are the coldest parts of the UK. They have the highest levels of fuel poverty per head of population, and that's a major issue that needs to be addressed. There are issues, there's a couple of strategic issues around generators that I wanted to highlight. We've got wind farms that are consented, and for many megawatts, gigawatts in fact, that are not able to progress because the MOD has not come up with a radar solution that will allow them to operate. This is a matter of urgency. I think this is an issue of capacity within the MOD and the amount of effort that they've been able to put into actually coming up with a solution. I don't think it's because there isn't a solution, there just isn't enough people working on the issue. The consequence of this is that we have some really big projects which generate employment in their construction and contribute to our net zero goals, that although they're consented and have passed every other barrier, this is the only hurdle that they can get over. And if they can't get over that hurdle, those consents will fall and those projects will be lost. That, I think, needs to be addressed as a matter of urgency, and I would urge the Minister to do what he can to work with his colleagues in the MOD to try and get some focus on that from the MOD. I welcome the work on social tariffs. The SNP have a manifesto commitment on that as well. And I know from colleagues in the Scottish Government that there's a lot of close working going on with the Department on that, and I welcome that working on that, and hopefully we'll see a positive resolution to that in the not too distant future. And finally, it would be remiss of me not to mention winter fuel payment. The £300 winter fuel payment that's been lost to so many tens of thousands of people across the Highlands and Islands, when you combine that with all the points that I've already made, the fact that energy has now gone up since the government came in last July, and that there was a promise to reduce energy bills by £300. For the most vulnerable pensioners, that means that you're now looking for £780. And I'm not entirely sure whether that £780 reduction in bills is going to be achieved, but that's essentially the position that the government now finds itself in. For thousands and thousands of people, that's what they need to find in order to maintain that manifesto pledge. And it would be interesting to know how that's going to happen. Thank you.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Angus MacDonald.
Thank you very much, Chair. And congratulations to the member for Bath for securing this important debate. Much of what I was going to say has been brought up, and I just want to reiterate a few things. How can it be that households on renewable electricity pay 4 times as much on people who get fossil fuel gas? How can that be so? It is so inappropriate, not least because the cost of electricity generation from onshore wind was 1/3 of the cost of generating electricity from fossil fuels. Yet electricity bills remain nearly 4 times the price of mains gas. To put this into perspective, my parliamentary flat in London, which is on mains gas, costs 5.8p per kilowatt hour to heat. Meanwhile, my home in the Highlands costs 23.7p. And that actually is not just the Highlands, it's across the whole of rural Britain. It is not just the countryside or rural Britain that pays this premium. It is also high-rise properties throughout all the cities across Great Britain. So it is an enormous and painful gap. None of us here don't believe that net zero is the way ahead. We all support that, but we just don't think it's just the way the pricing is done at the moment. Just a touch on fuel poverty. In England, the level of fuel poverty is 13%, and as my friend here said, in the Highlands it's much higher, it's 47%. So we have a very, very dramatic problem with fuel poverty in the north of Scotland. And basically, in 2021, an estimated 16% of households that use gas for heating were classified as being in fuel poverty, whereupon it's 41% for those people who require electricity. So it shows a clear trend between fuel poverty and lacks of access to mains gas. This really damages business as well. So a hotel in rural Britain is paying £80,000 if they're using gas. It would cost £25,000 at the most in a city for that same amount of heat, and it would only cost £10,000 if your hotel was in the United States using that same amount of heat. So it is really damaging business as well. We touched on the coupling of renewable energy and gas, and I don't think there's anybody who would disagree that this needs to be decoupled. And I'm sure the Minister is going to talk about that. And we've also touched on the environmental surcharges. Basically, these are put on electricity price with plus 20% plus of electricity bill is an environmental tariff, but just a fraction on a gas bill. So ironically, people using renewable energy are shouldering the environmental charges and not those using fossil fuels, the mains gas. Anyway, I'm very glad that we've had this debate, and I hope the Minister will give an idea how this enormous injustice of the environmental charges and the standing charges and all the excess charges on renewables can be removed to balance things out with people who are relying on gas. Thank you very much.
Opposition spokesperson, Joy Morrissey.
Thank you, Chair, and it is a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship and to see you in this place. You, Chairman, you were a wonderful shadow minister, and it's fantastic to see you here today. And may I praise the member for Bath for securing this debate. Rarely will you hear me heap praise on another political party, and at the risk of sounding like I am working cross-party, may I commend the member for Bath for her excellent points that she raised today. I think some of the points for highlighting the exorbitant cost of electricity bills here in the UK, I don't think any of us can argue with that. And the regressive levies on electricity bills are something that I find quite shocking. And I thought your innovative and positive policy solutions were a welcome breath of fresh air to reduce the cost of electricity bills. And I hope that we can have a debate further on this to bring forward this important point. I'm more on the scrapping the levy side, but I think we could come to a compromise in how we would move this forward. And also highlighting community-owned energy schemes. Many from your benches brought up the importance of community energy schemes, and I too have Marlow Energy, community energy, which I very much advocate. And I think it's important that across this House we are advocating for community energy schemes, and I think that was a theme that ran through most members' contributions today, so thank you for that. I think that's an important aspect of energy to take forward, Chair. And it was wonderful to hear from contributions from Horsham about the great Horsham Energy Scheme, and also the member for West Dorset and his expertise in energy. It's always welcome to have people bringing their professional expertise into this House, Chair, and I welcome that. Also to hear about the challenges that the Highlands have. I'm sure the Minister will be able to further give explanation as to what the plans are and the challenges for the Highlands. And although they are producing and will probably be producing even more renewable energy, it will be interesting to see what capacity they will bring there. And of course, none of us, I would be remiss if I did not comment on the wonderful member for Strangford for everything that he contributes to this House, not only in this debate today, but in every single adjournment debate. And his wonderful contributions, his praise for members across party and across the House. And we are lucky to have such a wonderful and hardworking member. So on the issue of the cost of energy, may I just say that it does affect every aspect of our economy. And few things are more important for our economic success than the cost of energy. It affects our global competitiveness of our industries and therefore the number of jobs that it affects our constituents throughout based on their energy bills. And the new Labour government had promised to cut energy bills by £300 by 2023. Still looking forward to that. Creating 650 jobs for the $8 billion they were taking off of taxpayers for the Great British Energy, and the launch of the era of clean, cheap, homegrown power. But after more than 6 months in government, it seems clear that they will make energy more expensive, with bills going up, not down, and the risk of shutting down sways of British industry with jobs lost to more polluting countries. In short, their energy plans will result in lower growth, fewer jobs, higher energy bills, and more carbon in the atmosphere. We are constantly told by ministers that renewables like wind and sun are the cheapest sources of energy, but that does not take into account huge hidden costs of increased reliance on renewables. And again, may I thank the member for Bath for bringing the important aspect of renewables to the forefront of this debate. And industry has already warned that trying to produce a record amount of renewable capacity quickly to meet the government's 2030 target pushes up the price and cost to consumers. The cost also depends on generating capacity you need to have in the background to kick in to keep the lights on when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine. I will give way.
I'm grateful to the Honourable Member for giving way in what I can only describe as a kind of anti-renewables, anti-action on climate change speech from what I'm hearing. I just wanted to confirm something. The Honourable Member mentioned that electricity prices were some of the highest in Europe, that their party was in fact in government for the last 14 years when this government inherited those. And could you just repeat on the record that you think it's the Conservative Party's position that all levies that support renewables on bills should be scrapped?
Thank you.
As honourable members, as opposed to you.
Thank you, Chair. I welcome the honourable member's contribution, and it is wonderful to hear his commitment to the climate change emergency and to hear his contributions earlier. And I think, for me personally, I feel that we need to move forward as a country in making sure that our energy costs remain low. We did not commit to the £300 of reduction in energy prices, nor did we commit to scrapping the £300 or the winter fuel payment for pensioners. So we went into the election, we didn't make those promises, and I'm simply holding the government to account right now in this debate. And we are constantly told, and well, why not?
I thank the Honourable Member. Just to repeat my question, we're not talking about what was committed in the manifestos. My question was about what the Honourable Member had said just a few minutes ago, was that you're committed to removing all of the levies on bills related to renewables. Just wondered if you could repeat that pledge.
And the honourable member makes a wonderful point. And personally, I feel very strongly about this. But in the joys of opposition, that is the glory of opposition, in that I can hold the government to account, but I can also have a backbench business debate or an adjournment debate of my choosing with my own passion projects. And not to digress, Chair, but if you look at the water bill, you'll see my passion projects put into flourish right in front of you. So I think I don't want to detract from this wonderful debate, but with what I'm saying is I think we can find a cross-party solution for many of these things, and we want to be positive about the UK and its future. But of course.
I thank her for giving way. I too would like some clarification from the opposition bench there. I mean, I'm on the opposition, but from the Conservative Party. Does she say that renewable energy is a solution to lower energy bills and gets us to net zero, but we don't really want them because they're too expensive. I wasn't quite clear of how she was making her argument, either for or against renewable energy. Could she clarify that?
Thank you. And the Honourable Lady makes an excellent point. And we do have, as the Conservatives, we had an excellent track record in putting renewables. We were the first to bring in the coal-free sort of plan of how we tackled energy. And I think this is an important way of moving forward. And as we go through this debate, and as we hear from the Minister, what I'd like to do is continue with moving forward with cheaper energy bills, making sure that we protect our energy security, but making sure that costs are low for both the consumer and for industry. Of course.
The debate rather late, but needless to say, I take an interest in these matters as a former energy minister, and anyone who takes that interest will understand you need a mix of energy between renewables and non-renewables, and renewable energy has to be tested on the basis of whether it's cost effective. And some renewables are, and some renewables are not. It's as simple as that.
Thank you. My honourable friend makes an excellent point. And because some renewables are cost-effective and some are not, and some are a lot less energy-dense than gas or nuclear. Of course.
I'm somewhat struggling with the argument of renewable energy not being cost-effective when for the cost of the amount of generation that Hinkley C will deliver us, we could deliver twice as much renewable energy generation. In fact, the strike price for offshore wind is far below any other source of electricity. So, I mean, I'm just at a loss. Across every single form of renewable energy, generation price is below fossil fuels. We're not, when the Honourable Lady talks about the previous government, being at the forefront of renewable energy generation when you signed off new drilling licenses for the North Sea oil, I feel like I'm living in a cloud cuckoo land. There's no connection between what you're saying and the reality of market forces in this situation. Just ask any wholesale energy price provider what their strike price is for renewables, and they will tell you it's lower than fossil fuel.
Well, I thank the member from West Dorset for his contribution, and I would ask that I be allowed to make progress in my speech, and I will answer many of the questions that you have asked as I go through my points, which you've raised excellent points. And because renewables, back to the point earlier, that they're dense, that some are more affordable than others, and you need to cover, for example, acres and acres of agricultural land to fulfill solar panels. You need to produce a fraction of the power that could be generated by gas power plants or small nuclear reactors. The time has come to have a much more sensible and serious conversation about the true cost of renewable-based systems, not just repeating again and again the renewables are the cheapest form of energy. That is why the previous Secretary of State, the Right Honourable Member for East Surrey, asked the Department to produce a full system cost of renewable-based systems. If we are intent on decarbonising the entire grid by 2030, as the government wants us to do, then we must have a detailed assessment of what it will cost, what it will do to our constituents' energy bills, and what it will do to our already high industrial energy prices. But since taking office, the Secretary of State has scrapped work. He is rushing headlong into renewable-based systems without any idea of what it will cost the country and what it will cost the economy. He points to the... I will make further progress just for a moment, Chair, to point out the issue of trust. And this comes down to trust for both our consumers and for those who are in industry. Throughout the general election campaign, the Prime Minister, the Chancellor, and the Secretary of State, and around 50 Labour MPs promised across the country to cut people's energy bills by £300. As soon as they got into government, they have refused to commit to that promise, and even worse, decided to take the very same amount from millions of pensioners in poverty. It is difficult to think of a bigger betrayal committed by an incoming government. Now, 6 months on, Labour have voted again to an amendment to make them accountable for that promise through the Great British Energy. Their energy company that isn't going to generate a single watt of energy. And the new chair of that company says that it's not even within the remit to cut bills by £300. You cannot spend weeks and months repeating such an explicit, clear, simple promise only to be completely rowed back on the second you get into government. So perhaps the Minister would like to tell my constituents in Beaconsfield and across the country when they can expect to see £300 off their energy bills. And how much will bills increase in the meantime? It is not just households who are worried about the cost of energy, but industry too. The same energy-intensive industries who wrote to the government to raise concerns about their plans to hike the carbon price to the highest rate in the world also share their despair and concern of the UK having amongst the highest industrial electricity prices in the world. In fact, the department's own data shows that we have the highest industrial energy prices in the world, well above the IEE and EU average. More than anything, our heavy and manufacturing industries need cheap energy. They need stable and reliable energy, which does not rely on the whims of weather. As with the shutting down of the UK oil and gas industry, seeing British industry move overseas won't change demand. It just means that domestic production, with all the tax revenue and the British jobs and investment that it brings, will be replaced with higher carbon imports from abroad. Ministers say that decarbonisation cannot mean deindustrialisation. But if our industries, which are hardest to decarbonise, cannot cope with the high cost of energy and therefore move abroad, that will be a disaster for our economy, devastating for workers and their families, and yet will do nothing to actually reduce global emissions. Ministers say they want to be global leaders. They want us to convince other countries to decarbonise. That is a noble goal. After all, climate change is a global issue, and there is no sense in us going it alone to cut emissions when we produce less than 1% of global emissions. That is exactly why the government needs to change tact and stop our industrial energy price rising any further. Because countries around the world who care deeply about holding on to their industrial and manufacturing base are looking to the UK and other Western nations and seeing what happens next. If they look to us and see industries which have been gutted by misguided energy policies, if they look to our people and see that they are suffering higher and higher energy bills, they will not want to follow us down the path of decarbonisation. We will be a warning, not an example to the rest of the world. Our ceramics, automotive, cement, steel, minerals, glass, aluminum, and chemical industries need cheap energy above all else. So I would urge the Minister to talk to those businesses who are struggling with high energy costs and ask them what a carbon price of $147 per tonne of CO2 would do to their businesses. The Minister might not like the answer, but the government needs to face the consequences of their policies. The government should be asking what arrangements will give us the cheapest, most reliable energy, and how do we get there? Instead, they are determined to decarbonise the grid by 2030 at any cost, to meet a political target, even if that sends people's bills through the roof, offshores our emissions to polluting countries, and leaves us at the mercy of Chinese imports. When facing the electorate at the next election, they will not be able to say they were not warned. Thank you, Chair.
Minister Michael Shanks.
Thank you and good morning, and it's a pleasure to participate in this debate under your chairmanship, Mr Western. And can I thank the Honourable Lady from Bath for raising this debate and actually for all our engagements over the past 7 months. She always, I think, helpfully challenges the government from a place of real passion and commitment to this issue, and I appreciate her words of wisdom, even if we don't always agree entirely. And in fact, I think there's a number of people in this room who we have had countless debates on energy policy. It's beginning to become a bit of a club we have every week here in Westminster Hall, and I appreciate all of the points that are raised in this debate. And can I say to the honourable gentleman from Strangford, I just can't get enough of his contributions. Having not spent enough time in the Commons yesterday, we're back again today, but I appreciate it. And I'll come to his points on Northern Ireland later. I think if I start with where the Honourable Lady started on the question of the public's view right at the beginning of her speech about the cost of energy, and I think she makes a really important point about how central this is, not just to, of course, the cost of living crisis that all our constituents are still living through, but their belief in government being able to change some of this as well. And so it is so important that we tackle some of these issues. And as the Shadow Minister rightly said, this government was elected on a manifesto around energy, and I'm privileged to have this job as Energy Minister because for the first time in a very long time this government has as one of its key missions fixing the energy system in this country, and the truth is that it does need fixed because of what we inherited from the previous government. And of course the energy crisis in 2022 was just the peak really of highlighting how vulnerable we are to the roller coaster of the fossil fuel markets. And of course it had devastating impacts and continues to have devastating impacts on all of our constituents and communities right across the country. And although consumers are protected to a certain degree from the energy price cap, our energy costs, of course, are determined by volatile markets out with our control, and as long as we remain exposed to that, the risk to all our constituents is that we face yet another price spike in the future. And my honourable friend, the member for Northampton South, made the point well that we are having, after 14 years, not just to turn around one bit of the energy system, but a whole series of lack of decisions, actually, by the previous government to really grapple with the scale of this problem. And that's why yesterday I announced in the House of Commons our transitional support for Drax and for biomass. The truth is we got a good deal for consumers and for sustainability, but we had to make that decision because we had no other options, because the previous government left us with no long-term planning for our energy security. And that's why we believe so firmly in our Clean Power by 2030 mission. By creating homegrown renewable energy, this mission will help reduce our dependence on the volatile fuel markets and protect bill payers for good. And Great British Energy will play a vital role in this mission by accelerating our deployment of clean energy. I'll just finish the point. So that Britain can become a clean energy superpower, but also, crucially, by investing in the supply chains that bring the manufacturing jobs for that renewable energy to this country. And I'll happily give way.
I understand his desire to create more economic resilience by creating more energy independence. I should have referred my members to my entries in the Register of Interest, by the way, in respect of this contribution and my previous one. But the key thing is transmission and distribution costs. 15% of every energy bill. No government has looked at that seriously. If you distribute energy production to small solar plants spread right across the kingdom, you will maximise those costs and damage the resilience that the honourable gentleman seeks. So would he focus on the concentration of energy production and bring it as close to consumption as possible?
Well, I will come to the point the honourable gentleman makes about transmission costs later, because I think it is an important point, and particularly how we grapple with constraint costs. The truth is we're going to have to build more network infrastructure, and I hope that he will support the construction of that network infrastructure, although I suspect he might not. But we also want to look at the review of energy market reform so that we can look at how we deal with some of these issues. And I'll come back to that point because it was raised by... I'll just finish the first intervention if I can. It was raised by a number of honourable members, and it is an important point about how we build the energy system for the future, not one that we had in the past. And the question of balance, I think, is key. This isn't just about having a renewables-only system, although renewables will be incredibly important. But we also announced last week our real commitment to rolling out much more nuclear in the country to provide the baseload, the security of supply, but also with the small modular reactors, the ability to place them across the country, particularly near real centres of demand, such as the data centres we're going to see in the future. And I'll give way to the honourable gentleman.
I thank the Minister for giving way. On the point of the necessity of upgrading the grid, the honourable lady representing the former government tried to mischaracterise the need to upgrade the grid as a cost of renewables. Does he agree that actually we need to upgrade the grid regardless of what technology you bring on? We lose 10% of the energy we generate through transmission. This is an old grid. Regardless of the technology, you need to upgrade the grid.
Well, the honourable gentleman makes a very good point that actually the upgrading of the grid is, yes, important to bring the clean power that we want to build in the future, but actually the grid is already 50, 60 years old and is creaking under the pressures that it has served under for a very long time. There is real need to upgrade the grid right across the country. And the truth is that the previous government recognised that was important. They launched the idea of the Great Grid Upgrade before we did, frankly. They're now running away from a lot of that. And I think that's hugely disappointing, but it won't get in the way from us. It won't get in the way from us moving forward to make sure that we build the grid of the future. Because the truth is, yes, we need to meet the demand for now, but by 2050, we know that electricity demand is likely to double in this country. And if we don't build the infrastructure now, that will be the weakest part of our economic strategy in the future. It is essential we build it now, but that we want to bring communities with us. I'll give way.
Is it not also true that while we need to upgrade an old grid, the challenge of the future is a decentralized energy system, and that is so often misunderstood. We had the big power stations, now we have decentralized, smaller energy providers, and that is a big challenge that we all have to recognize rather than criticize a particular government, as much as it might be tempting to just criticize the government of the day.
Well, never will it be said that I enjoy criticising the former government. But I would say, I would also flip what the honourable lady says on its head and say this also presents a real opportunity. And I'll come back to some of that point, particularly around community energy, where we do actually have a real opportunity here to look at the electricity system in a different way. But yes, it is right to say that the days of big cities with power stations right next to them are long gone. And so we do need to think of a different way of building our transmission system into the future. I'm going to make a bit of progress now because I think it's important. And, of course, finally on Clean Power 2030, the National Energy System Operators Advice also found that the clean power system can be cheaper than today's system for consumers. Contrary to some of the contributions, we know that, in fact, renewables are by far the cheapest to run. Of course, there is a cost to building them, but there is also, and this often isn't factored into the debates on this, there is a huge cost to building new gas power stations as well, and to build new nuclear power stations as well. Renewables come at a cost, but are then incredibly cheap to operate on our system. I wanted to come just to the points made by the honourable lady for Epsom, I think, who spoke very passionately about climate change. And I think this is really important. The mission we're on is, yes, about building an energy system for the future that gives us energy security, but it is also about tackling the climate crisis, which we can no longer think of as a future threat, but as we look around the world, just at this year alone, it is a present reality. And the statistics are increasingly difficult for us to read and not think that we should be taking more and more and more decisive action on this. I would just sort of gently say to her, she prods this government for not going fast enough. I would say in 7 months we've launched the Clean Power by 2030 mission. We lifted the onshore wind ban in England, which was an absurd policy. We've approved more solar than the previous government did. We had the biggest renewables auction in history with 131 projects. We created the pathway to Clean Power by 2030. We've delivered already record investment in the supply chains that will deliver some of the infrastructure upgrades we need, including £1 billion by Scottish Power. We launched the Solar Task Force. We launched the Onshore Wind Task Force. We're looking at the Offshore Wind Industry Council and how it can deliver more. I'm not sure we could move much faster, but if the honourable lady has some suggestions, I'm happy to take them on board. And finally, on the point, I'll just give way in a second. Finally, the point around the rooftop solar revolution. We agree, and this needs to be not an either-or, but both. We will need ground-mounted solar. It plays a really important part. But absolutely, we have rooftops right across the country, car parks, warehouses, industrial units, that we should be covering, and solar panels wherever we possibly can, and we'll do much more on that. The Solar Task Force, which the previous government ran, we reconvened to try and increase the ambition of it, and it will report in due course, and I'll give way to the honourable gentleman.
I thank the Minister for giving way, Mr Weston. It's just to return to my earlier intervention the switch off of the radio signal. In terms of infrastructure, does the Minister agree with me that the data communication company must be exhorted, encouraged in every single possible way to get on with the rollout? Otherwise, people who are very vulnerable will be paying more for their electricity.
Well, I had a segue planned in my speech that was going to get me to the Honourable Gentleman's point, but he's preempted me, and he's quite right to do so. He's right, this is a real challenge, and of course the switch-off is the right thing in the long term for us to do. I think everyone agrees that as a system it is outdated, but we do need to be absolutely certain that no one's left behind. And so my honourable friend, the Minister for Consumers, has already had a number of meetings with Ofgem and with industry to make sure we speed up the rollout of this. The service ends in June, as the honourable gentleman said, and the task force that's been put in place to roll this out is moving at pace now. It should have been moving, I think it's fair to say, faster to this point, but they are very aware of the issues, and we'll keep that under review, because it is essential, of course, that people aren't left behind when the signal is switched off. So, just moving on slightly to the short-term support, because we recognise the Clean Power System by 2030 will be crucial in bringing down bills in the long term and protecting consumers from the price spikes that we have faced in recent years. But the short-term support for households that are struggling with their bills while we're in that transition is important. That's why the Government continues to deliver the Warm Home Discount, which provides £150 rebate off energy bills for all eligible low-income households, and is expected to support 3 million households across the country this winter. The Minister for Energy Consumers has also worked with energy suppliers to agree a £500 million industry support commitment to help customers, specific customers struggling this winter. And we also extended the Household Support Fund until March 2026 with an extra £742 million, with additional funding for the devolved governments where fuel poverty is devolved through the Barnett formula. A number of members raised the question of a social tariff. My honourable friend, the member for Northampton South, made, I think, a very passionate case for this. And we are looking at what future bill support could look like, including the possibility of a social tariff. And I acknowledge there is a broad consensus on the idea of a social tariff. The challenge, I think, is that it often means different things to different people. And one of the challenges we're grappling with is how we could define such a social tariff and also reach the people in a really targeted way who need it the most. Part of this is the question of data sharing, which a number of honourable members raised, about how we bring together the information that the government has on individual people who could be most benefit from a scheme like this. And that's some of the work that, again, my colleague, the Minister for Energy Consumers, is leading alongside industry bodies such as Energy UK and stakeholders to look at how we can improve affordability and accessibility, and particularly working with the DWP on how we might be able to share some of the data that they have. Now, the question on levies has been raised by a number of members, and I think the Conservative Party are now pledging to abolish levies entirely. The truth is that this is incredibly complex, but it is something that we want to grapple with. And we do need to be really mindful, back to the Honourable Lady for Bath's point at the very beginning, that while the wholesale price will come down as we put more renewables onto the system, particularly as we squeeze gas off as the marginal price, if bills don't come down because levies remain high, then people won't see the benefit of this, and it is really important to bring communities with us on this. So the truth is, this is complex. I'm not going to stand here and say we can just abolish it or we can just transfer it entirely onto taxation. Neither of those options are possible in completion, but we are looking at how we look at the future of levies, and we're open to suggestions from all parties on how we do that. And particularly around the point on rebalancing, around how we move particularly electricity costs onto gas. This is also a challenge, particularly as we want the number of people who are on gas to decline in the coming years as we decarbonise. The challenge will be making sure we don't put charges onto a dwindling number of customers, and actually potentially, inadvertently, some of the poorest people in the country might be those that are the last to convert from gas to alternatives. So I don't dismiss for a second the points that have been raised. They are incredibly important, but I just want to be really clear that we are working relentlessly, this Parliament, around how we reduce the wholesale cost, and we want to make sure that we're also making sure that follows through into bills for consumers. And the related point to this, of course, is around standing charges, which many members will hear from constituents seem to be such an unfairness on the bill because they're not based on consumption or on particular customer circumstances. So we are committed to looking at the future of standing charges. In December, Ofgem provided an update on reform to standing charges. This included quite a radical proposal, in fact, for introducing a new zero standing charge option under the energy price cap, which would give consumers greater choice in how they pay for their energy bills. It's for Ofgem now to consult on this proposal, which they'll do this year. And of course, the driving force behind this will be making sure that any reforms are fair to all customers. That there are, and I say this just to underline that none of this is straightforward and we can't simply just abolish levies. There are unintended consequences if we transfer some of the costs onto other people, and we could inadvertently find ourselves in a situation where we're raising bills for some people without that being the policy intent. And so I say that because we're committed to reforming standing charges, but we want to do it in a way that is fair. I'll give way.
Thank you for allowing me to intervene, Minister. I wonder if the Minister would spare a minute to talk about community benefits. So, thank you very much.
I wasn't expecting the Honourable Gentleman to stop. I was just, I saw him in his place earlier, and I knew that I would talk about community benefits, and it is important. I want to just turn, actually I'll do it now, to both of those points about community energy and about community benefits, both of which are important. Firstly, on the question of community benefits, in all of this, we want to bring communities with us on this journey. That is important. We have made a very clear case that this government intends to build the energy infrastructure we need, build the transmission infrastructure we need, build the homes that people need, build the industry that people need to grow our economy. It is important. And for far too long, this country has not built the infrastructure it needs. But in doing so, yes, we want to streamline the planning process so that applications are dealt with far more efficiently and far faster, but we want to bring communities with us, and this is absolutely vital. We'll be saying much more very soon about community benefits on several fronts. Firstly, on how we expand some of the community benefits for particular technologies, which is already well established in Scotland, for example, around onshore wind. Clearly, because of the absurd policy of the onshore wind ban in England, that hasn't developed as much, but we can look to Wales and to Scotland for advice on that. Also, to expand that to other technologies, particularly to solar, which doesn't have the same community benefits at the moment, but also to network infrastructure, so that if we are building network infrastructure, if you host this, which is essential for the country, you are essentially, and I've always said this, you are doing a favour for the rest of the country by hosting that infrastructure. You should feel some benefit from it, and we'll announce a package of community benefits for that shortly. The wider point around community ownership is that not only do we want communities to benefit, but we want them to actually own the infrastructure that gives social and economic benefits as well. Very fine. I'm not going to give away just because I'm actually going to come to his point, which is to say that the Honourable Gentleman for Murray West, Nairn and Strathspey has made the point in the past, and he's very reasonable about the issue around a Highland pricing formula, and it's something we will look at. The reform to the energy market will be part of this work as well. I'm afraid I don't have time to come to much detail on mitigations on radar, apart from saying that we recognise the problem and we are working on it. And finally, Mr Western, I will sum up just by saying this has, as always, been an incredibly useful debate. The passion from honourable members is important because this is one of the most important challenges facing our communities. We are committed to ensuring that energy is affordable for households across the country. Our Clean Power mission will help us deliver on that. But we have much more to do, and we recognise we have much more to do, and we'll work with members from all parties, from industry, from consumer groups, from charities and individual constituents who raise these issues with us ourselves to make sure that we're supporting everyone with this transition to bring down bills in the long term and to support families with their energy costs. Thank you.
Vera Hobhouse.
Thank Thank you, Mr. Weston, and I thank the Backbench Business Committee again for granting this debate, which was very lively and engaged. It was good-natured, despite some disagreements, but where would we be if we all disagreed? We wouldn't need debate. So I am very grateful for anybody for their contributions, for the points that have been made, and for the Minister to engage very constructively into the points and the concerns that we are raising. The bottom line is energy costs and energy prices are too high for all of our constituents and for our benefits, for our businesses. It's to all our benefits that we bring them down, not just to get to net zero, not just to bring costs down for consumers, but also for the general prosperity of this country. Where would we be if we can't make the cost in which we produce things and warming our homes and so on and so forth lower than they currently are? So this is, I assume, the beginning still of a debate, much more to do, but I thank the Minister, I thank all members again for their constructive contributions, and we'll be here soon again, I assume. Thank you very much.
The question is that this House has considered the cost of energy. As many are as of that opinion, say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. Order, order.